Hi, this is Georgia Stathis, and I'm so happy to see you here today. What we're doing is introducing you to a series that was recorded back in the early 80s with the guys who produced Metallica. It's a long story. My friend, who is a big PR agent, knew these guys at Silver Shadow, and they took me on, and we did a whole series of the signs of the Zodiac. And so what you're going to be hearing is the archive lessons from each signs of the Zodiac, and I hope you enjoy it. It still holds true after all these years, and if you want more of what I do, please go to starcycles.com.
Today we're talking about the sign of Aries, which is the very beginning of the Zodiac, and which always happens around the first day of spring equinox, around March 20th or 21st each year. It continues on for about 4 weeks, and it completes around April 20th. Now, Aries is a very different sign of the Zodiac in that there is no model that it follows. It is the seed state of the Zodiac. Everything begins at this point. And the symbolism is quite appropriate in that if it begins in the spring, it begins when the plants are just popping through the earth. I recall many years ago when I was growing up in the Midwest, right around the time of Easter, which was around this time, March 20th or 21st, there'd always be a blanket of snow on the earth. And you could see for fields, I mean, where I lived, it was like a countryside. There was fields and fields without any kinds of trees, and they were very flat. And you would look out over the fields and you'd see this beautiful blanket of white snow. And right around each year, it was religiously each year at the end of March, through the snow would be cropping up these beautiful purple and blue crocuses that were this first flower of spring. And it always amazed me when I would look at those flowers, how they were so bold and so brave to go through the snow, because if anybody knows anything about the Midwest, in April there was always going to be another big snowstorm, and it would possibly destroy half those beautiful flowers. And I give you this story because this is very much what the sign of Aries is really about. Regardless of the environment or regardless of the difficulty of the moment, this is a sign that is known for its willfulness and its need to move through difficulties and its need to take action, even when there's not anybody else around that's willing to do the same. This is a sign that is associated with bravery and courage and is very much associated with warriors and heroines. And it's a very basic sign. Aries is not what I would call one of the most complicated signs of the Zodiac. It's simple, not simple-minded, but simple in that it basically looks at one thing at a time. It looks at the task that it wants to accomplish, and it will only want to accomplish that task if, in fact, it has passion for that task. If it's not interested in that task, it'll have nothing to do with it. And so sometimes this sign, very much like the sign of Capricorn, is associated with tunnel vision. They will see something, they will go for it, and they will move through it. I'm reminded of in Mexico, years ago, I used to go to bullfights, and now I don't do it so much anymore, but I did it then. And I remembered looking at the bull, who was very enraged usually whenever he would see the red blanket or the red shield or the red sword. And he would go right for it. And that's very much what Aries is about. It sees something that stimulates it. This is a sign that reacts and responds to stimulation. And they're known for reaction, and they will react, and they won't always think about the consequences or the pain that comes from the reaction. And one of the challenges that they have in their life is learning how to not always react to all the stimuli that comes toward them, but to sometimes stop, think, and then react and act. It's very much like the difference between the Greek version of the god Ares, who was a war god, and the Roman version of the god Mars, who was also a war god, except he was more like a gladiator god. And I use this example because the sign of Aries, like each sign of the Zodiac, is ruled by a certain planet, and the planet is called Mars. And Mars is the planet that we see in our night sky on and off throughout the year that is called the red planet. Again, the color that's associated with Aries. And Aries, or Mars in the mythologies, were war gods. Their primal purpose, or their prime purpose, was about going and fighting in the battle. The reason I say there's a difference between these two, and this is basically the lesson in an Aries life, is in the earlier version, the Greek version, the god Ares, A-R-E-S, was a young man who really didn't think. He had a lot of bloodlust, and he would, whenever there was a war, there was an argument or a fight, without even thinking, he would just pull his sword out and go into battle and probably get pretty beat up and pretty chopped up, but he did it anyway, and he was quite foolish in his pursuits, and a lot of the gods laughed at him, and they really didn't have much respect for him because he really didn't think. They knew he wasn't afraid. And of course, Aries is really not a sign that is afraid. They don't even, the word fear is not even in their vocabulary. But as we develop and we go through the mythologies and we go into the Roman version, which is the god Mars, Mars is, if you just look at the statues of Mars, or if you look at the photographs of the statues of Mars, he's a more mature man. He's more muscularly developed. He has a stillness about him, but there's also this quality that if he needs to act, he is available to act. I'm reminded of the film years ago, or the book Spartacus, about gladiators and warriors. And, Spartacus was very definitely a very highly developed Aries personality. And what is the gladiator about? What is the gladiator thinking about? It's about being able to fight, much like the Greek version. But before you even move or take action, stopping to think and strategize. And in an Aries life, one of the big lessons is learning not to just react, but to think and strategize before one reacts. That seems like a very simple task, but it's a very complicated task, especially if you understand the real basic quality of this sign. This is a sign that's very primal. It's very basic. All the other signs of the zodiac come from this seed that we call Aries. Aries is associated with the head, which was perfect because each sign of the zodiac is associated with different parts of the body. And Aries is associated with the head and the mind and the eyes and the ears. And usually, if a person has a lot of Aries in the chart or a strong Mars, because Mars rules Aries, they will have a very good mind, a very good brain, and a very strong curiosity to find out anything there is to find out about anything and to try new things. So they're oftentimes we consider them to be one of the most intelligent signs of the zodiac. The other side of that, though, is since Aries falls at the beginning of the zodiac rather than the end, and because it's less developed, because it's the seed state of the zodiac, there's also can be, not always, but can be a very immature or childlike quality. In other words, children, if you watch children want their own way. They don't really think about other people, and that's the way it should be because that's the life of childhood. And Aries has a childlike quality to them. They decide they want to do something. They don't really care what somebody else wants to do. They want to do what they want to do, and they're going to do it whether the other person likes it or not. And this can be a negative with the personality. The other side is also this childlike amazement and this childlike, naive and wonderful open view of life. This is what I would call a very open sign of the zodiac. It doesn't really pass a lot of judgment because it's not afraid, and it's willing to try new things and willing to pioneer. We associated the sign of Aries with pioneers and people who are oftentimes in business for themselves, or people who have the idea before anybody else has the idea, or people who are not afraid to kick the door down to a new business or a new company or a person that's you can't get to, like a corporate CEO or something. They're not afraid. They'll just go through the door and say, this is what I have. This is why it would be good for you. And there is no second thought. And this is the beauty of this sign of the zodiac, is that there is no second thought. They're forward thinking. And for this reason, many times they'll either work for themselves independently, or if they do work for other people, it will have to be in a capacity where the other people allow them to have their head. In other words, to allow them to do what they have to do to make the job work. If the other people do not allow that, then they usually leave. And this can be a sign of the zodiac that will find themselves in a lot of different jobs because they are quick, they are bright, and they get the concepts a lot faster than probably their peers do in the same group. And if the people they're working with are forward-thinking or willing to go at that pace, then they'll stay with them. If they're not willing to move at that pace, they'll leave.
I hope you're enjoying the Myths and the Signs of the Zodiac series. I know I love doing it, and I hope you're enjoying them as well. If you want to learn more about astrology or just find out about what we do, please go to our foundation, which is the AlexandriaIBase.org Foundation, which is a free database that's available to people all over the planet If you're interested in astrological books or articles, all you have to do is put the subject in the keyword phrase and it will find it for you. We have a lot of old Mercury hours and a lot of old journals uploaded. It's a great, juicy place to find astrological literature where it's located. So I hope to see you there, and I hope you continue enjoying my series. Thank you.
This is a sign of the zodiac that's associated with the element that we call fire. In astrology, there's 4 elements. There's fire and air, which need each other in order to survive. And there's also earth and water. And fire is consuming, and this is a very consuming sign. This is a sign of the zodiac that decides that, whatever it takes, whatever energy it takes, whatever time it takes, it's willing to do that, and they can be consumed by their tasks. Fire, when you think about fire, you sometimes hear negative connotations. Well, it burns things up or burns things out. Well, Aries personalities, a person who has a lot of Aries in their chart can burn people out as well as burn themselves out if they don't learn how to balance the consuming tasks that they have ahead of them with play. They have to play. That's one thing that they have to do to keep in balance. But fire also has another wonderful quality about it, and the Native Americans knew about this, and they used it in all their rituals. Fire is a purification element. It has a way of burning away what is no longer necessary. And if you're dealing with a person who has a lot of Aries in their chart, you better be pretty strong, because they're going to tell you what they like about you and what they don't like about you and what they're going to put up with and what they're not going to put up with. And they're not saying it from being mean or angry. They're saying it because that's the way it is. They've seen through it, and they don't want to fool around with anything that's not basic. This is a basic type of personality. This is a personality that's not, I don't want to say they're not, there is a lot of depth to Aries, because the sign that comes before Aries is the sign of Pisces, which is the last sign of the zodiac, which has all the spiritual information. And so they have that memory in them, but they've been there and they don't want to deal with it. They're basically pretty simple. They're living their lives. They're going to do a few things. They're going to have the experience and they're going to move on. This is an experiential type of personality. This is a personality that we call a cardinal type. In astrology, we have these three ways of operating. We have cardinal energy or cardinal signs of the zodiac. We have fixed signs of the zodiac, and we have mutable signs of the zodiac. The cardinal group is associated with Aries and Libra and Cancer and Capricorn. And cardinal types are ones that move forward, that begin things, they're the ones that we have to have. They're like the trigger in the gun, okay? Fixed signs, Taurus, Scorpio, Aquarius, Leo, they're ones that don't have a real easy time of moving. They're not ones to move. They're ones that sort of stay stuck. They also are known to be builders, and they can stay in one position and develop from this one position, but they're not really known for their movement. They're sort of in a place where they just sort of anchor things and ground things. Then there's the mutable group, which I lovingly call the movables, who are the Geminis and the Sagittarians and the Pisces and the Virgos, who move back and forth between stuck and forward, which means many times there's a lot of inertia that occurs with this group. This is a group that juggles things and goes back and forth. But we're talking about Aries. We're talking about the cardinal of all cardinal signs, the beginning of the zodiac, the most forward-thinking, the one that will be there before everybody else gets there. The child in a classroom when he or she is growing up that will only listen to the things that the teacher is teaching that are of interest to him or her. The rest goes out the door. This is the child when he or she is growing up that usually does very well in school, but whose teacher tells the parents, little Johnny or little Shirley or whatever is a very good student, but they just don't pay attention. They're busy daydreaming when they're not interested in something. They're not there for me. They're interested in math, or they're interested in phys ed, or they're interested in geography, but they're not interested in history, and they're not interested in art. And that's because this is a group that only does what it's interested in. And that's why they're considered to be rather self-centered. There's positive sides to this group like there are with all the signs of the zodiac, and there's some negative discordant sides. The positive sides is they're definitely leaders. You want to see a good leader, they'll probably always have Aries in their chart somewhere in a strong position. Their positive qualities, they have a tremendous amount of strength, much like the ram that it is named after. They're assertive, they're aggressive, they fight for a cause if they believe in it. But there's a negative side too. If this is the beginning of the zodiac, the baby of the zodiac, the child of the zodiac, they can be pretty self-centered. They can believe that they are the center of the universe and the universe revolves around them. They can believe that not only the universe revolves around them, but that nobody else is going to think any other way. So they're known for their egotism, their arrogance, and they can be, if they're less developed, as they mature, of course, this does change, they can tend to be very domineering or to dominate conversations or families or dynamics in relationships. And so they really need to have someone in their life who doesn't buy into that, number one, and who really, as the domineering energy comes through, sort of balances it out with humor or whatever, because this is a sign that it's not that they don't learn, it's that they don't listen. And they can tell you in about 2 seconds flat about what they're thinking and process a thought quite quickly, but listening and remembering what was said to them, this is not one of their greater strengths. And this is why lots of times they end up having scars or broken bones or, these misadventures, so to speak, is because they might have been forewarned or they might have been told, or maybe even their wonderful instinct was telling them they maybe shouldn't be doing a certain thing, but they did it anyway because they wanted to have the experience. And this is a group that goes for the experience. Physically, they're pretty obvious when you see them coming down the street, especially if they have Aries rising, which of course only can be determined by the time of day that the person is born. But if the person has a very strongly placed Mars in the chart or many planets in the sign of Aries, these are some of the things that you might see. First of all, generally speaking, the body will have more of a rectangular shape. It doesn't really usually have a waist. It's kind of like a long drink of water kind of look, square shoulders, even a long rectangular box. The thing that's most prominent, though, when you look at them is their head. Of course, Aries rules the head, so that is the way that it should be. And the thing that you see on the head that is the most prominent is the brow line above the eyes. Usually it has this bony, for the men and the women, this bony structure that's a little bit more protruding, which makes the eyes be more inset on the head, much like the ram or the ram's head, which always has its head forward. Generally speaking, the nose will not be tiny and petite. It will be prominent. It will not be huge and bulbous, but it will be prominent, much like, again, the ram, who's always banging its head against wood or other rams. The scars that you'll usually see, and generally speaking, somewhere on the head there's going to be a scar, either huge scars or little scars or marks that occurred, generally speaking, in youth, will many times be around the brow line. A classic example of this might be a little boy or girl who plays baseball at the age of 7 through 10, and somebody's up at bat, somebody throws the bat hits them in the eye, which is real classic for children's little leagues in baseball. And of course, the child now has this gash or scar across the brow line. And it's quite interesting if you think of the symbolism behind that, because the bat is much like the weapon that Aries or warrior types carry. This is a group that loves its tools. It loves its knives. It loves its guns. It loves its cutting instruments. It loves, anything that has to do with taking aim and firing. So they're very much associated with tools. In fact, one of the groups in terms of occupations that's associated with this sign are surgeons who use very intricate scalpels and thongs and, all kinds of intricate equipment. Diamond cutters. Aries is a sign that rules diamonds, which is interesting. It's the hardest element or the hardest rock that we know of on Earth that can cut other things, but nothing can cut it. And that's so appropriate because the key thing around this sign of the zodiac is that this sign of the zodiac is not only associated with warriors, who are also associated with wounds and wounding. And we've been talking about the scarring that sometimes occurs on the face. Well, sometimes there's not any scarring on the face. Sometimes there's wounding or scarring that has happened in the personality. One of the major challenges that you will always see with this group of people is that in their life, at some point, they have experienced either very severe physical wounding or emotional or mental or spiritual wounding. And one of the other key factors that's associated with that is that oftentimes will come from experiences in the early home life. Because one of the challenges for a warrior or a heroine type, an Aries type of personality, is that in order to be the person that goes on the walkabout, who goes on the adventure, in order to get to point B, they have to do first point A, which is leave their family or leave their clan. And this is a classic example. There's 3 phases to every Aries or warrior or heroine's life. The first part of life is usually you're born into a family that either you always felt was not your family. In fact, the funny thing about this, and it may not be funny, but it is funny, is lots of times little Aries children will think, well, my family just adopted me. And their family didn't adopt them, but they feel like they're strangers in a strange land, like they don't really belong to their family, or that they're very different, or they're very progressive, or that they want to move further out than their families are willing to move. I'm reminded of the movie as well as the book by Jean Auel, The Clan of the Cave Bear, which was written a few years ago, where this clan of the cave bear finds this little girl at a very young age, 2 or 3 years of age, who has, her whole family's been annihilated and killed, and she's from a totally different clan with totally different rules and regulations. And they take this little girl into their family and they raise her as one of their own. And yet, from the moment she enters the family, she's always different because her experience is different and her perception of life is different. And ultimately, to make a very long story short, she has to leave the clan because she doesn't fit. And this is the first part of a hero or heroine's or an Aries journey, is leaving the clan, because in order to go on that walkabout, on that journey for the quest, they have to leave. And either they leave by choice, which is probably the better way to do it, or sometimes they leave because they've had wounding in the early home life. I mean, these, not all the children, but the children that are abused or whose families just aren't available to them emotionally, these are the ones that might be uncomfortable enough to cut away from the family. The second phase, after you cut from the clan, is the Aries has to go on their journey, on their walkabout. And this is the lonely part of the journey because you don't go with anybody else. You usually go alone. And you go into the jungle or into the forest alone with your sword, and you fight the dragons, and you explore the dragons, and you know they're going to be behind every tree, and there's nobody there to really help you, and you're basically on your own, and it's sink or swim. And it's a survival issue. It's a matter of making it. And generally the walkabout is sometimes associated with developing a very deep spirituality or a deep feeling of religion or having faith in some higher power. And once the warrior or the Aries personality goes on this walkabout, the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell talks about, then and only then can they get the girl or the boy. In other words, can they mate or marry or hook up with someone else? In other words, become self-actualized and self-fulfilled like a king or queen. And in the life, that's the large brushstroke theme. And what they will oftentimes find in their lives, there'll be little mini brushstroke themes like this. For example, an Aries personality may be in a job for many, many years and they've enjoyed it and they've learned a lot, but now there's starting to be some fighting and some arguing within the corporation or the company. And it's getting uncomfortable, and it's not like, quote, unquote, it used to be. This is generally speaking, and this is where the Aries personality has to learn to listen. This is the beginning of the threefold journey. You're getting ready to cut and leave the clan, to sever from the clan. If you were comfortable, you wouldn't leave. If you're uncomfortable, you have to take your knife and cut away and make a clean cut of it and move on to the walkabout, which eventually takes you to a new level of self-actualization. So there's not a whole lot of unmovement in an Aries personality's life. There's constant movement. And when they start to get themselves into trouble, because they do have tempers, this is one thing that's really true about Aries personalities. They, especially if there's a lot of Aries in the chart, they have a temper, but it's a different kind of temper than perhaps maybe a Taurus's type of temper. And Aries, when they get angry and they get angry fast, much like when you light a match. And then just as quickly, it's over. And they don't hold on to it. There's a difference between this kind of anger and the following sign of the zodiac, which is Taurus, which will not say anything. Taurus, the bull, or really the cow, will go for long periods of time and not say anything. And then there'll be some crazy little minor thing that occurs. And then there's this explosive Mount Vesuvius kind of response that never quite leaves. It's always lingering and resentful. Aries is not like that. Aries is, I'm angry, this is how I feel, it's over with, and now can we be friends? Now, you have to be a certain kind of personality to be with this kind of a personality, because sometimes when people experience someone else's anger, they may think the person is holding a grudge. Aries people don't hold grudges. They just say it the way it is, they get angry, and it's finished. And this is quite healthy, and this is one of the reasons lots of times that they, out of a lot of the signs of the zodiac, much like Capricorn, will live a much longer life because they don't hold a lot of things in. Since it is a sign that's associated with the head, one of the things that they will sometimes experience, especially when they're not feeling like they can express themselves or when they're feeling as if not anybody else is really listening to them, is they'll have a lot of headaches. This is the sign of the zodiac that has headaches, that has migraines. And generally speaking, if this occurs, it's because things are being held back. This is a sign of the zodiac that may also have eye problems sometimes, since the eyes are associated with the head, and as they get older, they may require glasses, and sometimes there may be some hearing. I always wonder about that. They say sometimes that Aries people have hearing problems, and I don't know if it's so much that they have hearing problems as it is that they don't really always listen. That it's more of like a selective listening. If it's relevant and it matters to them, then they'll listen and they'll remember and savor every detail. If it's not of any interest to them, they'll be accused of not having listened. And so I don't know if there's really a hearing problem with this sign of the zodiac, or it's just selective hearing, which, we hear about all the time. This is an impatient group. This is not a group that, unless there's a lot of other aspects in the horoscope, and of course, I say this when I talk before groups or talk to you as an individual, that all the signs of the zodiac are not just the signs of the zodiac. We're not just our sun signs. We have all the other planets in our horoscopes. Every chart takes 26,000 years to come back exactly as it is when we are born. So a lot of the things I'm saying may apply and some may not if you have other aspects in the horoscope. But one of the things that is fairly consistent with this sign of the zodiac is that this is an impatient sign. This is not a sign that will take long hours of tedium to accomplish things unless they have a lot of other things in the horoscope that support that. This is a group that is very, very good at starting projects. They're very project task-oriented. We talked about that earlier. One of the difficulties is finishing the projects that they start. Completion is not their strength. Starting is, completion is not, which is one of the reasons these people will many times be at the head of a company or the head of an organization delegating, and this is the best position that they can be in because they can delegate to other people that they know will finish the job. And this is one of the lessons they need to learn when they're in the professional world, is learning how to delegate rather than taking all the tasks on themselves. They do make very good bosses because they do have a sense of what's fair outside of themselves. In other words, they can step back and look at the situation and say, well, you did this, but this is a better way to do it, and really give you an objective viewpoint. However, when they're involved in the decision, sometimes they're not able to be that objective. Now, we talked about the fact that this is a group that's warrior-like, or heroine-like, because there's female warriors as well as there are male warriors. We talked about how this is a group that's very, very primal. This is a very sexual group. It's very interesting if you look at the mythologies or you read the mythologies of Aries. The Greek version, Ares, Aries was really his name. He was involved with the goddess Aphrodite, and in the Roman version, she was Venus, who was actually married to someone else. So they were kind of having this illicit affair that was going on. But their affair was always laughed at by the gods because they weren't very discreet. I mean, Venus was married to Hephaestus, and she didn't really care, and he didn't really care, and they were basically being led by their feelings rather than their thoughts. And so one of the things you do see with this group of people when they're in relationship or when they get involved in relationship, lots of times, just like the sign itself, they'll see the stimulation of the other person. They may not always think about all the possibilities or what could happen or what may not happen. They just jump in feet first. They jump over the cliff, and then after they've jumped over the cliff, they realize, gee, should I have jumped over this cliff? It's after the fact. So there can be kind of a reckless and wild quality about their personal lives. I mean, things start very quickly and things end very quickly. I mean, there's not a lot of in between. And one of the things that's real true for this group in terms of relationship, especially when they're dealing in a relationship, is they really have to feel it's, in many ways, they're sort of saving their mate. Much like the knight on his quest. He's going to save the young maiden on the journey. And this is, again, where the test of discrimination comes in, because sometimes they're saving the wrong maidens or the wrong men along the way. And as they get older, hopefully they learn more on how to deal with that. So we're looking at some of their challenges. First thing is they have to leave the clan to be a full-born Aries. And yet what's very interesting, they have to leave the clan. They leave, they sever, they cut away. But in the end of their life, when they make the full circle of the walkabout and they find the mate, they always end up having a clan. Their clan or their family for Aries people is very, very important to them. This is an interesting group of people because once they decided that this is what they're going to do, they stay with their families forever. And at home, they can be, and we'll be talking about this as we go through the different areas of life, they can be real calm and quiet and very nurturing and very supportive, but in the outer world, they may not always appear to be that way. One of the other tests is the right use of will. Another test is thinking before they act, listening, and also finishing what they start.
Hello, this is Georgia Stathis. You've been listening to our archived series, Myths and Signs of the Zodiac, and we thank you. If you like what you heard and you'd like to know more and hear more, please go to our website at starcycles.com, where you can find an assortment of available tools, pieces of information, and things that you can use in your own practice or in your own study of astrology. Again, thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon.